Okay, so you recognise this from the other video we made recently about thrifting in the UK. So this is the generic CLR technology case with the Athlon XP inside it. And I think really this case, I think, should really be holding a Pentium 4. I don't know why. I think that is just kind of this aesthetic. Just reminds me more of a Pentium 4 era. This beige CD-ROM drive is bothering me, so I'm going to get rid of that. But what we're going to do is actually just strip this and use the motherboard for the other project. So we're just going to take it apart. We're going to take all the pieces out and see how useful that motherboard might be. There we go. One motherboard removed. Now we've got it out, we can see the caps looking pretty good. They're not bulging. I can't see any leaks around the base, so that's all good. So this is the computer we're going to be refurbishing. You remember it probably from the donation video that I made a few weeks ago. I haven't touched it since. It's still very grubby, but if you remember, the motherboard in this didn't work. So what we're going to do is take it out and see if we can get a replacement. This is the one that had a little bit of corrosion on it on the inside, but otherwise the power supply was working. We put a hard drive in there, but the capacitors on the motherboard looked like they were bulging and it wouldn't work properly. We couldn't install Windows on it. So let's take it apart and see if we can do something about that. Let's have a quick look at this motherboard. So these caps down here are all fine. This one here is starting to bulge and it's got rust on the top. This cluster's fine, this cluster's starting to bulge, and these two here bulge so much that they're rusting on the top, which is probably why it wasn't working. Doesn't look like there's any damage on the underside. So if we manage to replace these caps here, we can probably get this board working again. This board is unusual in that it's got some SATA ports on it, and it's got an important sticker on it telling us to read the installation guide before using SATA drives. So the case has got some rust on it, as we saw in the other video. The front plate is very grubby. Let's see if we can get that off and give it a bit of a clean. So sometimes these front plates clip off, sometimes they screw off. This one looks like it's got screws. So 3 screws on this side. And it looks like there's 3 screws on the other side as well, which are going to be difficult to get to. But it does look like this motherboard tray is removable somehow. So we've slid it forward, and now these little latches line up with the holes, and we can just take it out. And then that gives us access to the screws down here. So the case front should just pop off now. We've got the switches and the LEDs to deal with. Now one side's come loose. Now sometimes they come off and then lift out, but this one, because it was screwed down this side, I don't think it does that. I think it's just got jammed on something. I think it's this plastic rivet here, which is coming through from front. I think it's bulged on this side and it's stopping it from going back through. So we may have to sacrifice that. There we go. Front power's off. And you can probably see it's very rusty. And that rust has come from top of the floppy and the underside of the optical drive. So let's take them out as well. Now they should just slide out, but because it's rusted, it's being very troublesome. So you can see how badly it's rusted down here. It's obviously had some kind of water damage at some point. As you can see, it's very rusty, top and bottom. So again, it's very rusty on the top, and the bottom looks like it's had some liquid running down the front of this computer. These little front panel SD card readers were very popular. It looks like this one's sustained some damage on the inside. The firewire port in particular is very rusty, so is the USB. And this audio connector is green from rust, not green because it's supposed to be green. The other connectors look fine. I think we should take this apart and have a look, see if it's recoverable. So there we have it. So we have a dirty, dusty, rusty case. We'll try and do something with this internal rust. Otherwise, the case itself is actually quite nice. I quite like it. It is restricted though by that position of having the CPU in front of the motherboard. The front case is very grubby. It's also a little bit yellowed, but I think we can do something with that. We can certainly give it a bath, get rid of this rust and dust. And the label's adhesive, so we'll have to leave that on while we're cleaning it. I don't think we should retro bright it, because we're gonna, well, if we take this label off, for example, we'll have a big yellow, a big differently coloured patch underneath, and this is glued in. We should probably lose that or damage it if we retro bright it. So I think just cleaning it is probably the best thing to do for this. I'm tempted to take this off though. Yeah, it's not coming off easy. And this poor optical drive, we use this to install the operating system, but as you can see, it's taken a bit of a battering as well. So we'll try and address this rust before we put it back in. The optical drive is rusty around the bottom and one of the sides, a little bit of rust here at the back as well, and a couple of little spots on the top. So what I'm going to try and do is pop the front cover off and just see how bad it is on the inside. So you can see how much dust is coming out of this, how much rust of dust. So I think to save this, we need to take it apart completely. I think I'm going to do that in another video. The rust goes back inside along the floor of the housing quite a long way. So I think in the short term what we'll do is just put a different optical drive in this case. But we will return to this in a future video. I'm thinking the same might be the case for the floppy drive. So let's have a quick look at that. And yeah, we've got the same problem here. It's very rusty on the interior. I don't think we're going to have time to fix that in this video. Luckily I do have some spare floppy drives we can use instead. And I'm guessing it's going to be the same story for this as well. Okay, so it's not too bad on the interior. So again, same problem, we've got rust going quite a long way back inside on the floor. The actual circuit board looks okay. So we'll probably need to deal with that in another video too. So looking at this, I think we're just going to put it straight into for a clean, but let's just quickly see. Yeah. It's not really coming off. So I think we'll just wash that and hope the labels survive. So I decided to remove the label after all, and because of that I thought I probably should consider retro-brighting it just to make the patch less obvious. First of all, just carried on giving it a bit of a scrub, and in some cases a bit of a scrape to get rid of any of the rust stains. Came out a lot better, I think. Certainly a lot cleaner, but still a bit yellow. So my preferred method of retro-brighting is with a paste type of hydrogen peroxide. It's readily available from hairdressing establishments. So the problem with it is that it can be a bit streaky. So here I'm just covering it with cling film because it's going to be outside. That'll mean it dries out less quickly and things won't fall on it. So about every 30 minutes I tend to go over it again, spread out the peroxide mix, and that means it's less likely to be streaky. So in a video I made a few months ago, a comment from a subscriber suggested that we try Evapo-Rust on a rusty, I think it was a Dell case. So I bought some in preparation for giving it a clean, but I've never actually used it. It says it's biodegradable, powerful, non-scrubbing and reusable, ready to use on tools, auto, household and equipment. And I don't know how to use it. I can imagine how to use it, but it sounds like it should be quite a toxic kind of product. So maybe we should read the safety instructions. So powerful, non-scrubbing, reusable, easy to use. Powerful rust remover that effectively removes rust from all types of steel, safe to use on all surfaces, no fumes or bad odours, can be reused until performance drops, readily biodegradable. 1. Pre-clean item. 2. Rinse thoroughly and completely immerse item in Evapo-Rust. Let it soak until all the rust has been removed. Deeply rusted items will require extended soak times up to 24 hours. Rinse the item with water and dry. Use a CRC anti-corrosion product or paint for optimal protection. So basically you just need to immerse the item in this and it removes the rust. So that's interesting. Now, I'm not going to get the whole case submerged in 1 litre of this, so we need to think about how we're going to do that. This drive cage potentially we could immerse in that product. You know, the bottom of this we're not going to be able to do that, and also with this drive cage which is welded in place. So what I'm going to try and do is actually just apply it using a brush and see if that works. So let's start by cleaning it. It doesn't have a particularly strong smell, which is nice, as claimed. So I'm just basically painting on a liberal amount. Some of it's running down the sides. So it doesn't appear to be any kind of bubbling like there is when you remove alkali residue from a leaked battery. The stuff that's draining away onto the tissue is slightly discoloured, so I think it is working. So obviously doing it this way, we're not going to be able to reuse the product, but we are using much less of it than if we were submerging something. A couple of dabs more on the heavily rusted stuff, and then we're going to leave it for a little while and see what happens. So that didn't work, so I did end up submerging it, and I did manage to get the bottom half of the case submerged as well. So in preparation for this restoration, I did actually order another motherboard. I went online and I found this one. It's almost exactly the same age, made by the same company, same form factor, same features pretty much, but it's a different chipset. This was sold to me as working, but I don't know if you can see this, but we have the same problem. These caps here and these ones here, they're all bulging already. They haven't leaked yet, but basically this is going to be a great solution, because as soon as you put this in, after a few months, it's going to cause the same sort of problems. We're going to have random symptoms, random lockups. These are all bulged as well. So I would say maybe 60% of the capacitors on this board are bulging. So even if it does work, I'm not going to put that in. We'll have a little look at it later. What we are going to do is just investigate what CPU's in here. So this is a Sempron 2600, which means it's running at 1.83 gigahertz, and that is going to be much faster than the Athlon 1.2 gigahertz that's going to be on this motherboard that we've taken out of this particular machine. But when I saw that this had bad caps, I ordered some other motherboards. So this came in the post a couple of days ago. So this is an Asus A7V8X. So not an ASRock board, it's an Asus board. It is a little bit bigger, as in it's a little bit wider, but it's ATX in terms of length. It does have two SATAs on it, like the original board did. It's got 3 memory slots. The original board only has 2. This one comes with an Athlon as well. This is a 2600, so that's the fastest of the processors we've looked at so far. The original one came with a 1.2 gigahertz. So I presume that's a pre-XP model, because it's not given a performance rating. It's actually 1.2 gigahertz, full stop. This board is kind of more equivalent to what's on there, that was on there originally, although the CPU is going to be much faster. So this motherboard also is more similar in that it's got a VIA chipset. It's got a KT400, not a KT400A. These two serial ATA must be driven by this Promise chip here, because KT400 doesn't have serial ATA support built in. This one capacitor here is looking very slightly bulgy, but the others seem okay, and it's only very, very slight. However, now I look at it, there is a pile of crud around the bottom of it. So again, another motherboard that's potentially not usable. The capacitor plague is a big, big problem. So what are we going to do? Well, as it happens, another motherboard turned up this morning. So this is what turned up this morning. It's an Asus A7VE, and it's a little bit more similar to the first one in that it's a VIA chipset, not SAS, but it is a previous generation, so it's a KT133. It doesn't support DDR memory, just PC133. It has got 6 PCI slots and an HP port. And for a low-end Athlon or Duron, it's probably, you know, quite a good solution. So I haven't thought about it for a little while. I think we should use this motherboard, mainly because it looks in the best condition. Now that's an SDR motherboard. I think we should use the Athlon 1.2 gigahertz. I think that's the fastest Athlon that will run with SDR memory. At least they were kind of equivalent in terms of when they were released. So that would be kind of Athlon 1.2 gigahertz will be the top end that this motherboard would be expected to kind of perform with. We can put some SDR memory in here. It's a beige case, so I'm thinking more towards the 98, Windows 98 era, maybe Windows 2000 or probably even Windows Millennium, to be honest. So yeah, let's do that. Let's put the 1.2 gigahertz Athlon in here, in this KT133 motherboard. We'll put Windows 98 SE or Windows ME on it. We'll have a 20 gig hard drive, and we'll try and source a GeForce 2 card for the AGP slot, and then that will all be age appropriate for about 2000. But first of all, we need to know if this motherboard works at all. So what we'll do is transfer over the processor, get some memory in here, put a power supply on it, and see what happens. Now, it's interesting because this is not an Athlon 1.2 gigahertz at all. So this is actually a Sempron 2800, which is running at 1.6 gigahertz normally, but this motherboard or this BIOS obviously wasn't recognizing it correctly and was treating it as an Athlon 1.2 gigahertz. That does explain why it's a little bit confused about the XP. So if you look at the previous video, it was claiming it was an Athlon at 1.2 gigahertz, but it was calling it an Athlon XP, and I don't think there was an XP that ran at 1.2 gigahertz. That explains that. So we are now back in a situation where we've got a variety of different processors and some different boards. So we can't use a Sempron processor in this board, it's too new, so we need an original Athlon or an original Duron processor. We can go up to 1.4 gigahertz with the Athlon and 1.3 gigahertz with a Duron if we have those. Let's have a little look in the box. I don't think a 68A40 is going to fix it. Nothing in there, unfortunately. So having had a quick look in my CPU parts bin, I have not got anything that's going to fit in here that's age appropriate, and so I'm going to have to order something to go in. So we're not going to concentrate on the motherboard and the RAM side of things, we're going to concentrate on getting that case fixed. So the case has come up really well. It's cleaned up nicely, it's less yellow than it was. There's a little bit of abrasion marks down here which I'm going to try and get off with a sponge, but I'm not too worried about those, they're quite discreet. Overall it looks much better than it did originally. It's making a bit of a difference. I don't want to make it too shiny though, I don't want to remove the texture from the plastic. I think that's as much as I want to do without removing the texture too much. So I managed to get all the rust off this drive cage by submerging it, and we got most of the rust off the floor as well. So let's reassemble this case. Let's forget the switches as well. So that's the LED indicators for the lights, power and the reset switch. So the optical drive we've chosen hopefully matches quite well colour wise. It's not bad, it's a little bit pale, there's a little mark on it, but we can deal with that. How about our floppy disk again? It's a little bit grubby, but is it roughly the right colour? It's not bad at all. So giving this a light retro bright I think has helped quite a lot. So I'm just going to put the optical drive in now just so that we can get it flush and it'll stop these two covers from sliding down, which is what they're currently doing. So this motherboard is lucky because it gets to go on a motherboard tray. So this case has the flexible option of a motherboard tray. I haven't cleaned it yet, which is what I'm just doing now. And we'll see if the standoffs are in the right place. They should be. It is a different motherboard that's going in though, don't forget. So we've got these indents here. This is for the PCI slots covers. So we know that's the back left if you're right, and this is the back left, or back at the bottom, back at the top. We know that this is where the motherboard is going to sit. It's going to sit at this end. There's a standoff here which is loose, let's just tighten that. It's a slightly wider board, there's some holes here for some standoffs, so it may be that we need to put some standoffs in here as well. Yep, along this edge we'll put in some extra standoffs. So standoffs do come in different heights. That's a very tall one, that's a very short one. For example, the majority are the same size. If we just put one upside down next to that, we'll be able to tell if that's the right size. That is the correct size. So I've only got two holes that I can use. I was hoping there'd be another one there. There's obviously room for a plastic standoff. Okay, so that's where our motherboard is going to sit. First of all, though, let's put our memory in. So we've got 256 megs of SD-RAM. It's 133 megahertz and it's CL3. SD-RAM's got two notches, so it's easy to get it in the right way around because there's two notches on the RAM slots. Here we go. I've used the one that's furthest away from the AGP slot because sometimes the AGP card overhangs the slots and then it makes it harder to get to the little catches. This motherboard can be used via jumpers to select the bus speed and the multiplier, but if you put this little jumper here to the right hand side, you can do it all in the BIOS. Having looked at the standoffs, this one is actually surplus. I don't want it touching the bottom of the board and shorting something it shouldn't be touching. So I'm going to take this one out. So I'm just going to put one in this end of the board to align it, and I'm not going to tighten it up, but then I'm going to get one at the other end of the board. Make sure that's lined up. And then in theory all the other holes should be correct. One more to go mid-board. Got a fresh 2032 here in the slot so that we can keep the BIOS details up together. And that's basically it. We've got a CPU, RAM, motherboard, heatsink and fan, and hopefully we haven't cracked that CPU die. So we've got a motherboard on the tray. All we need to now is try and fit it back into the case. So our PCI slots are here. There's a little holes in the tray for the bottom of the PCI cards to fit into, so we know the tray goes in this way around. Got to line up the bottom with the bottom of the case. And then these holes let the tray slip through, and the whole thing slides backwards. So in theory that is now in place. Now I don't have the I/O shield for this motherboard, I don't think, which is why I've left it blank. If I find it, I will put it in later. Now we do potentially have a problem. This is where the IDE cables come through, and it's right next to this drive cage, so we need to do some cable management. What I'm going to do is install the cables onto the motherboard before we put the tray in, and then fold them so that we can get past this cage. So in fact the thing that's bothering us the most actually is the RAM being in this slot, so I am going to move it over to the other one. That gives us more room to get these cables through. So we now have cables coming through this little small gap, and then we can then feed them into the rest of the system. So we've got some front panel cables to connect, and we also have the speaker and power switch to go in as well. So connecting up the front panel connectors is always the hardest thing. At one point Asus were including a little interposer that allowed you to put your cables onto that little card first, and then plug the whole thing straight into the motherboard. And interestingly, on this motherboard, the LED indicator is way over here. So that's front panel all connected up. So we've got our heatsink and fan installed on the CPU, and that's in the motherboard. So what are the components we're going to use? Well, we need an optical drive. I'm going to use this DVD-ROM drive. So what I'm doing is aiming for a kind of, not budget and not top end, kind of mid-range computer from about 2001, end of 2001. So what I've done is I've picked all the components I think that you're spending medium amount of money on at that point in time. So this is quite a good kind of mid-range option. It gives us flexibility to play a DVD if we wanted to, or a game that came on DVD, but there's no writing facility. So I think that's fairly mid-range. For graphics, we're going mid-range at all as well. So the most time correct era is the GeForce 2 era. And if you had all the money, you'd buy a GeForce 2, a full-blown GeForce 2, but a lot of people on a lower budget were buying MX cards, and that's exactly what this is. This is an 8-bit Celerio T400. It's a GeForce 2 MX 400, so it's slightly above the base MX. Again, it's kind of middle range. So that's an ideal card to put in here. This one happens to have 64 megs of RAM, which is above the basic 32. So again, that's quite a good mid-range option. So for RAM, we're limited to SDR, not DDR. And for mid-range, you've got two different options. You can either go for 128 megs of faster cache latency 2 RAM, or you could have bought 256 megs of cache latency 3 RAM. So I think the more RAM is probably a better option, even if it's slower. I think that's probably what I would have chosen back in the day over 128 megs. So I'm going to put a one stick of 256 megs, cache latency 3, SDR RAM in the board, see what happens. So this motherboard optionally comes with a LAN socket on it. The version we've got doesn't have that, so we need a network card, and there's nothing more age appropriate than a Realtek 8139 PCI card, so that's what we're going to put in one of the PCI slots. That'll give us 10100 Ethernet. And then for sound, we're going to use a Sound Blaster Live. This is a Sound Blaster Live Value. That seems totally appropriate for a 2001 mid-range build, but this is going to be much better than the onboard sound. So that's going to go in another PCI slot. We're going to put in a floppy, mainly because there's a hole in the case for one, so we're definitely going to do that. There's going to be a second hole, if you remember there was an SD card reader in there, but haven't had a chance to tidy that up yet, so there's going to be a hole where the second 3.5 inch bay is, but we'll put a floppy disk in one. So what are we going to do about storage? Well, we're going to use a mechanical hard drive. I'm not going to go for a flash option. And we probably would have had a choice of mid-range drives around that time, but something like a 30 to 40 gigabyte IDE, of course. And that's what we've got here. We've got a Seagate U Series 5. It's a 30 gig, 5400 RPM drive, perfectly reasonable. But if you were being a little bit more adventurous, you might have gone for a 7200 RPM drive, and that's what this Western Digital is. So this would have cost more money because it's a faster spinning drive, so you would have to have gone for a smaller capacity. So this is a 20 gig drive. High-end systems would have had probably 120 gig drive, but for what we're going to be doing, a 20 gig drive should suffice. We can always put a second one in later, which would have been a legitimate upgrade. So I think we're going to go for the 7200 RPM drive. So to make this computer work, we're going to need an operating system. 2001, so Windows ME was out, but it was about to be replaced by Windows XP. I think because we're going mid-range, I think we should consider using Windows ME. Windows 2000 Professional was the other option, but that would have been a much more expensive option and geared more towards business. So if we were building something for the home, we almost certainly would have put Windows ME on it initially and probably upgraded to Windows XP the following year. So motherboard's in, front panel's connected. What we need to do next is fill up this before it's too difficult to get things in and out. So we're going to put in our floppy drive and our hard drive. So our hard drive's already set for cable select. We're just going to put that in the bottom bay. Flop drive's got to go in the bay above at the top. And again, we need to get that at the right distance. so it's sitting flush. So this cable isn't keyed, as this connector isn't keyed. The red end of the ribbon always goes next to the power, so we know it's that way around. Let's plug in the optical drive as well. I didn't check if that was set for master or slave, but hopefully it is correct. Not the best cable management, we'll deal with a bit more once we've got the power supply in. So we're going to use the original power supply. It's probably not original to this machine, but it's the one that came with this machine. And we're going to use it, A, because we know it fits, but also B, it's got a fairly strong 5-volt rail, 25 amps. So that's really important with socket A systems. Get one screw in the top and that should hold it in place. So all ATX power supplies have specific places to put your screws. That is an industry standard. So if your screws aren't lining up, it means you've got your power supply in the wrong way around, or you're not using an ATX power supply. There we go, so that's it from the outside. Now we've got to deal with the cable management inside. So that's where it's got to go. Just make sure it doesn't foul the CPU fan. Hard drive power is easy because that's on this side. Floppy drive power is more difficult because it's on the other side. So now we've got 2 strands available should we put another optical drive in. So next we need to put in our PCI cards. So we've got our graphics card, there's only one place that can go. So we need to remove this blanking plate, add in the AGP card, which luckily isn't too long, and put the screw in. AGP slots are a little bit finicky because of that double layer of connectors. So it's definitely worth making sure your AGP card is securely put in. Otherwise you may find it doesn't work properly. So next I'm going to put the network card in. I'm going to put that right at the very bottom. In fact, no, I'm not. I'm going to put that in slot number 2. It's a low profile card, so it'll give plenty of airflow for the passive cooling on the video card. So that's why I'm putting it there. And then the sound card I'm going to put furthest away from everything, just in case that improves the audio quality. There we go. Sound card, network card, video card. What I'm not going to do is put the analog audio cable from the optical drive over to the audio card. I don't see any reason to put those in these days. We do it all through MP3s if we need audio. The only time it would be an issue would if it was a game that potentially had a mixed mode optical disc. I think some of those have analog audio whilst they're doing their digital game. Okay, so it's time to turn it on. Okay, so it's time to turn it on. I've got a new VGA capture device, so we'll see if that works as well. Nothing. So I do have a green light on the motherboard that tells me the motherboard is receiving power. I think maybe I haven't installed that power switch correctly. Okay, moment of truth. Let's power it on. We have power. We have video output. Okay, so we need to go into the BIOS. It's recognised the 1.1 gigahertz Duron, so that's good. But let's go into the BIOS. Make sure that's okay. Date and time is correct. There is now a floppy disk drive in here, so let's add that. It's recognised the hard disk, 20 gigs. We'll turn smart on. There's no reason not to have it on. And it's recognised the optical drive as well. It's recognised we've got 256 megs of RAM in, so that's good. So the DRAM, we definitely know that works at 133, that's the spec. We're going to go for normal system performance initially, just to make sure we get best stability. And we definitely want the cache enabled. We're going to go by SPD for the RAM. It's showing it as 2 ticks, but it should be cache density 3. I'm going to turn this off because we've got a sound card. We don't want it coming back on. So this is telling us that the CPU temperature at the moment is 43 degrees. So it's not under a lot of load, but typically when you're in the BIOS there's no power saving applied, so you're probably running at full power. Fan's pretty quiet, so that's nice. Voltages seem pretty good. So we're going to boot from the CD-ROM first. I can't remember what's on this drive. It may be completely empty, it may be full. We should probably move that up. We're not going to need the floppy because it should be able to boot straight off the Windows ME disk. We'll do a quick power on self-test, so we don't have to watch the memory count up. And we have got an AGP card in, so that all seems entirely reasonable. So we get our Windows ME disk and put it in here. So I thought Windows XP was the first holograph disks, but this Windows ME's got a holograph disk. So we're going to save that. We're going to exit. And we're going to try and install Windows ME on his 20 gig hard drive. Okay, so the hard drive obviously does have an operating system installed on it. We might as well have a quick look at that. So this Linus isn't going to boot, it's probably too new for this processor. So let's see if the reset button works. It does. So we've definitely selected optical drive over the hard drive, but it's still not booting off the optical drive, so maybe there is a fault with this CD-ROM drive after all. Okay, that's somewhat annoying. Let's get a boot floppy in the optical drive. No, let's get a boot floppy in the floppy disk drive. We'll wipe the hard drive and then it will boot off the optical drive. Display what's on there. It's going to be unhappy because it's some non-DOS partitions. There you go. So let's delete that. So I have no partitions defined now. Just a quick reboot. We're going to start off the floppy disk again. And what we're also going to do is have a quick look at the MBR. So for whatever reason, Windows ME is not happy. Okay, to try and resolve this, we're going to pop this optical drive out. We're going to put in the original release of Ubuntu. So this comes in a live CD version and an install CD version. So we're going to pop the live CD in, see if we can boot off that. Well, we can certainly boot off the optical drive, so that's good. Okay, so we're not getting much further with this. So the optical drive spun down, there's nothing on the screen, hasn't booted. So maybe there's a problem with this processor. Potentially there could be a problem with the RAM, but I think it's more likely to be a motherboard / CPU issue. Let's see if we can boot Windows 2000 Professional. Okay, well that seems to be getting a little bit further. Okay, so it's gone through the whole loading of the driver stage, but won't actually run the setup. So I'm thinking maybe there's a RAM issue. So let's reduce the timings in the BIOS, see if that helps. If not, we'll put a fresh stick of memory in there. I was about to say the other possibility is that there's a problem with the VRAM on the video card. And now the video's not the card's not outputting video, so maybe that is indeed a problem. And let's come back on. So let's change the DRAM frequency back to 100 MHz, just to make sure we're not missing anything. Maybe that RAM is incorrectly labelled, for example. Now I don't actually want to install Windows 2000, I actually want to install Windows ME, so let's go back to that optical drive. So it's saying this before it's even spun up the optical drive, so So that's not an error from Windows ME. It didn't occur when we had Windows 2000 in there. Let's just go back to trying Ubuntu 4.10. So that's definitely working. Yep, that's still not booting. So there's definitely something not quite right with the system currently. So it looks like the optical drive is working. It looks like the floppy disk drive is working. But there's something not quite right. Possibly with the processor, something possibly with the RAM. We could start taking PCI cards out as well. Just going to try one last thing. So the error message we're getting for Windows ME is happening before the disk actually spins up. So why don't we boot into DOS using the floppy drive, see if we can access the setup from DOS. Yep, definitely something not quite right. The floppy disk is still spinning. It's crashed trying to load the CD driver. So is it the optical drive that's a problem? That's very easy to test. So we're getting a little bit further. We've managed to get to the booting screen, but we've got no progress bar. So I still think there's something wrong with the motherboard, the processor, or the RAM. As I say, it could be PCI slots, so we could take those out. But it's probably not the optical drive. All the optical drives seem to be doing similar things. Original drive reinstated. We've got the 128 megs of cache latency 2 memory in the machine now. Let's see if that makes a difference. Well, it does. It now won't boot. So one beep followed by 3 quick beeps is a memory issue. Yep, reseated the RAM and it seems to be booting. Let's go to the BIOS, make sure it's recognised. Yep, so we've got 128 megs of RAM. That's all good. Just make sure it's recognising the hard drive, the floppy drive, and the optical drive, which it has. Let's make sure the boot order is correct. That is all good. Sometimes this setting, the boot virus detection setting, can be an issue. That stops programs writing to the very boot of the hard drive. But that is disabled, so that shouldn't be a problem. Still the same problem. Let's run it in fail-safe mode, see if that makes a difference. Now, it could be that there's not enough RAM to run this from the live CD because it's trying to create a RAM disk. Now, it is a slow processor, but I think even by now we should have had something created. So, taking out the 2 PCI cards, we're a basic system now. And it's not recognised the memory. Something's still not quite right with either this motherboard. Let's try some actual PC100 RAM, see if that helps. Nope. There is a small chance it's the video card. New video card in. Okay, let's put a normal amount of RAM back in. Okay, 256 megs of RAM back in. That's been recognised, so that's all good. It's 133 megahertz RAM, but we'll just leave it at 100 for now. And we'll see if we can actually boot anything. So we still haven't got any further on this, so there's potentially still a problem. Which is a shame, but getting really hungry now, and one thing you shouldn't do is start to diagnose problems when you're hungry. So I've been troubleshooting the system for about 24 hours and it was just progressively getting more and more unstable, and just a few minutes ago it made a bit of a puffy sound and there was a strange smell, and now it won't boot at all. So there is now something wrong with this motherboard, unfortunately. I can't see exactly what it is. None of the caps look distorted or discoloured. None of the components were warm to the touch. immediately afterwards, but it definitely won't boot now. I tried it with a second power supply as well, and that hasn't helped. So there's definitely something wrong with this board. Recapping might be the solution, although I think it might be something more to do with voltage regulation. So that's going to be the end of the video, unfortunately. A bit of a disappointing end. We managed to get quite a lot done. We managed to clean up the case, but this motherboard is not to be. So another video will be coming out at some point in the future with us looking at a replacement motherboard for a kind of mid-range Duron build. Anyway, hope you found the video interesting. If you did, like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.